You've shot your photographs for your photo remake project. And so this was my source photo. And you can see this is the final image, right? But this is what I had to start with. And I'm going to go through the process of how I got from this original image to my final image that was closer to the image I was recreating. Now this won't be exactly what you'll be doing, but you'll be using some of the same techniques. So you've imported your images via Bridge and you've gone through and you rated them and say this is my 5-star image, this is the one I'm going to use. So you open it up into Photoshop. Now when you look at my final PSD document, you'll notice I have a lot of layers. I'm using a lot of adjustment layers, I'm using gradient, I'm using masking, and I'm going to go over this. Now a lot of this is things that you did in the previous project, but there are some additional tools that you'll also be using. So the first thing is I go in here and I'm ready to start doing my photo remake photoshopping. So the first thing you're going to be doing is you got to notice what size is the image that you're doing. Is this a square image? Is this more of a 3x4 image? So the first thing you should actually be doing is you should be cropping your image. And you'll notice that in your toolbar, there's one right here. It looks like a little like X through a square. It's a crop tool. And whenever you hover over any of these images, you'll get any of these icons, you'll get what it is. So I hover over this, it's a crop tool. So when I click on the crop tool, it gives me a bunch of presets. So I want a square because my photograph is square. Your photograph might not be square, right? So I move it around, I get it to where I want it to be, and I'm going to hit double click or return on the keyboard to set my image. All right, now I'm going to duplicate my background layer just so that I always have, the source image unadjusted. You can go over here and you can hit duplicate layer, or you can do Command or Control J. And now that I have more than one layer, I have to save my image. So I'm going to go File, Save As, and you should call it Photo Remake. And I'm just going to call mine Photo Remake version 2 because I already have one version. So, all right. Very importantly, remember you always need to be saving your work because this does not save automatically. All right. So there's a number of things you're going to be experimenting with. You're going to be experimenting with the adjustment layers. So let's go through. There are a lot of adjustment layers, and why we would use adjustment layers is that they are non-destructive changes. That means when I add an adjustment layer, like I add my black and white, not only can I control the conversion, right? I can control how it's being converted to black and white. I can then, when I'm done, go back in, if I finish doing that, go back in and edit it. So my changes are never permanent. They're always have the ability to go in and edit them. So different adjustment layers that you should play around with using. Definitely the black and white you need to use. You can use the brightness and contrast. You can make it brighter. You can make it more contrasty, make it less contrasty. So I recommend definitely use black and white. You can use the brightness contrast. You can use any of the ones here. There's also exposure. You can make it more exposed. You can use, try these. Some of them won't work so much when you have a black and white image. Brightness contrast, levels. So there's a lot here, and you can this is changing my midtones. You can go through here and you can play with them. So I really want you to play with these. Specifically, you must use black and white, but I also recommend trying out the levels, the brightness, contrast, the photo filter, etc. So these are a lot of different ones that you can use and experiment with them. See what works because you want to try to make it look as close to this image as possible. Right. Always important that you go in and you are on the layer that you want to be editing. So if I'm over here and I want to do some other stuff to my image, I'm going to be editing this level layer and not my actual image, all right? So a couple other things that you can use. Remember in our last project we had the clone tool. The clone tool, basically, you define a source, which is holding Alt on the Mac or Option on the PC, and then you can clone it. Now, that is not something I'd actually use. And I'm going to undo that by going to Window, History, and I'm just going to go back a couple layers in time. And so that's good in terms of if there's little things going on in your photograph, like that you don't want, and you can get rid of them. So make sure that you are changing your brush size, which means the brush is up here, or using the bracket tool to make it bigger and smaller. And this is similar for any of the tools that have brushes. And remember, I'm defining with the Alt click, and then I am going in and I'm fixing it. So you can fix your image if there's little things that are imperfections. You want to make it look as close to your image as possible. So the clone tool is one tool you can use. You can also try using the spot healing brush or the healing brush. And this basically what you are doing is you're going to also be defining a source, and you're going to be healing areas of your image here as well. So this is another way. You can either use the healing brush tool or you can use the clone brush tool. And this is just fixing little like imperfections in your image. All right, so that's another thing you can do. Another tool that I recommend that you use is the dodge and burn tool. And these tools come from the days of actually when you had to do photograph manipulation in the darkroom. So dodging meant that you are not exposing that part of the image as much, and burn means you are burning in that image, you're exposing it more. So if I'm going to be burning and I want to make it darker, so burn, remember, darker. So I might make her sides a little bit darker, the side of her face, because I may want to make it more similar to this image. But dodge is want to make it lighter. So say in the original image, this was lighter. Well, I'm not really doing it the way that I would be doing it. This is just for example. So dodging is lighter, burning is darker. And I would play around with the dodge and burn tools. You have a couple over here you can play with, the blur and sharpen one and smudge one as well. So play around with all of these. They're sort of up to your own decision about if they are worth using or not using. It's really dependent on the image that you're going to be sort of manipulating. All right, so a couple other things that I recommend you also try, and one of them is the liquify tool. So filter, liquify, and what does this do? So this is really cool. This allows you to move parts of your image around. So I can make her eyebrows a little bit more extreme, right? I can use the bloat and the pucker tool. So the bloat tool is especially good because I want her hair a lot bigger. So I'm just making her hair a lot bigger and bloating up her hair to make it more like Marilyn Monroe-esque. Okay, and this again uses the brush, which you can change over here, or use the bracket tool. And when you're done, say okay. And you can see now her hair is a bit bigger, and how much you can really manipulate your image. All right, so play around with that one. Remember, that's why you're keeping one layer of unmanipulated image, so that way you can always go back and sort of see what changes you've done and decide if you want to keep them or not, right? Another one that you can do is when you're sort of done with your edits, you can duplicate that layer, go to filter, and you can use the different blur tools. So I like using lens blur, and this just sort of blurs out my image slightly because I noticed my image here, she is slightly sort of blurred out over here. Now this blurs my whole entire image, and this is when I would use the mask tool. So I'm adding a mask. And this is just like in the other tutorial. And you can use the brush or you can use the eraser. And I'm just going to use the brush, and I got to make sure my foreground is black. That means I'm taking it away. So that I'm just keeping this part in focus, but this part over here is blurring out. And so you can kind of see that here. It's like less blurry, more blurry. So that's a nice tool to use. So liquefied filter, you can try the blur filter. You can also try adding a gradient layer. And so I'm going to have a new layer, and I'm going to call this gradient. Okay, and here I have the different gradients. All right, I'm just going to set my colors to black and white. And this one will switch the foreground and the background color. You can notice up in the corner, it changes the gradient here. So I'm going to pick one that has a sort of radial gradient. And I'm going to go start in the middle, and I'll drag out. And boom, what, this is not good. So this is a good time to play around with. Now you remember the blend modes. So So you can play with the blend modes. I can say, I like overlay, but I want just a light opacity. So you can change the opacity, change the blend mode, and change stuff like that. So that's another thing you can do. So those are all a lot of tools for you to play with. Photoshop is a Goliath of a program. There is a lot you can do. All right. So in my final image, you'll notice I've used a lot of layers, and you should as well. Play around with it. Try to get it as close as possible. Try looking at the tonality of your image. Burn, dodge. Try the different tools that are at your disposal. All right. Make sure that you're always saving your image, right? That means the little star goes away. You're always saving as you go along. Remember, if you need to undo things that you've done, the Command Z, but also the window, and you go to history, and this will let you go back many, many different steps. All right? And when you're all done, say I'm all done with this one, go File, Save As, make sure it's a JPEG. All right. Click Save, make sure quality's at 12, hit OK, and then you're just going to go in and you're going to submit your photo via the Haiku Dropbox. And that, in a nutshell, is your photo remake project. Remember, experiment, explore, and try things out.